The dispatcher's voice, a tinny drone of practiced calm, crackled in Brenda Millstone's ear. "Ma'am, can you repeat the nature of the emergency?" Brenda adjusted the crisp white visor shading her perfectly sculpted face, her knuckles white on the cordless phone. Below her, parked in the immaculate stenciled slot labeled Guest Parking, Unit 112, was the source of her outrage. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a monument to chaos. A massive boxy ambulance, its red and blue lights strobing silently, was bleeding garish color onto her prized petunias. "It's not an emergency," she hissed, her voice a low, controlled tremor. "It's a theft. An illegal seizure of private property. I want them removed, now." A beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, you're reporting that an ambulance has been stolen?" "It has stolen my parking spot," Brenda clarified, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. The sheer audacity of it sent a hot spike of fury through her chest. This was Whispering Pines, a covenant-controlled community, not some lawless wasteland. There were rules. She had written most of them. "That is a designated, board-approved private parking space. They had no right. I want an officer here to cite them and have them towed." Inside the house the ambulance served, paramedic Mark Callahan felt for a pulse, the worn linoleum of the kitchen floor digging into his knees. The air was thick with the metallic tang of fear and the faint, sweet smell of burnt toast. Mr. Henderson, 82 years of good humor and bad jokes, was gray, his chest still. "Starting compressions," Mark grunted to his partner Dave, who was prepping the defibrillator. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of his hands on his neighbor's sternum was a desperate drumbeat against the silence. The flashing lights of his own vehicle were the only thing illuminating the grim tableau, painting the walls in frantic strokes of red and blue. He was so focused, so deep in the protocol of saving a life, that he didn't notice the second set of lights, the purely blue ones pulling up to the curb. He didn't notice the silhouette of his HOA president standing on her porch like a Roman emperor, pointing her finger not at the house where a man was dying, but at the ambulance sent to save him. Then he heard the sharp rap of a nightstick on the front door, followed by a voice that wasn't there to help. "This is the sheriff's department. We've had a complaint. Is anyone in this ambulance? Where are you watching from? Comment your city. I want to see how far this HOA power reaches." 6 months earlier, that same front door had smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Mark Callahan had carried his wife, Sarah, over the threshold in a fit of cheesy romance, their laughter echoing in the empty rooms of their new home in Whispering Pines, North Carolina. The air, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth after a summer shower, felt like a promise. They had escaped the sirens and congestion of Charlotte for this slice of curated tranquility. Mark, a seasoned paramedic and former Army combat medic, craved the quiet. He'd had enough chaos for one lifetime. He wanted a place where the loudest sound was the buzz of a cicada, and the biggest emergency was his 7-year-old son Leo skinning his knee. The first sign that paradise had a gatekeeper came in the form of a whisper-quiet electric golf cart. It purred to a stop on the asphalt beside him as he was assembling a small plastic basketball hoop for Leo. The woman at the helm was immaculate. Brenda Millstone, 58, was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. She wore a starched white tennis skirt, a pink visor that perfectly matched her lipstick, and she held a clipboard like a scepter. "Good afternoon," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. They were the color of faded denim, and they were busy scanning every inch of his property. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Brenda." Mark Callahan. "Nice to meet you," he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. The humidity was a thick blanket you could wear. Her eyes landed on the basketball hoop. "Just so you're aware, Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants prohibits non-permanent structures from being left in public view overnight. It will need to be stored in your garage by dusk." She tapped the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "Aesthetic harmony is our #1 priority," Mark blinked. "Right, of course. Just for the afternoon." "Wonderful." She gave another tight smile, her gaze lingering on the hoop with profound disapproval before her cart hummed back to life and glided away. Mark watched her go, a strange, unsettled feeling creeping up his spine. He glanced down and noticed a dark, quarter-size stain on the pristine asphalt where her cart had been parked. A tiny oil leak. An imperfection in the otherwise flawless facade. He shrugged it off. The woman was wound a little tight, that's all. 2 weeks later, he received his first official notice. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope left tucked under his doormat. The paper was heavy, expensive, and it smelled faintly of her sharp, floral perfume. The violation? Unapproved mailbox pigmentation. He had repainted their sun-faded beige mailbox with a fresh coat of beige. But it was, according to the included paint swatch, desert sand instead of the board-approved sandy flats. The difference was imperceptible to the human eye. The notice included a photograph of his mailbox, circled in red marker like evidence in a crime scene. A $35 fine was due in 10 days. If you've ever been bullied by an HOA, you're going to love this ending. Stick with me. That night, Mark sat on his porch, the useless fine notice feeling slick and heavy in his hand. The air tasted of coming rain, a low rumble of thunder echoing from the west. He could see the warm glow of Brenda's living room window directly across the cul-de-sac. He saw a shadow move past the blinds, a brief silhouette of her head, and he knew, with a certainty that made the hair on his arms stand up, that she was watching. This wasn't about a color. This was a test, a power play. The real declaration of war came over 2 garden gnomes. They were a gift from Sarah's late mother, stout little ceramic figures with cheerful, painted-on smiles. Sarah placed them in her small flower bed beside the porch, a small, private tribute. The violation notice arrived in less than 24 hours. Prohibited yard adornments, it read, citing a bylaw against items of a whimsical or folkloric nature. The fine was $50, this time with a warning that non-compliance would result in daily penalties. Sarah was heartbroken. They were my mom's, Mark. She thought they were funny. Seeing the tears well in her eyes ignited something in him. It was a cold, familiar anger he hadn't felt since his army days. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was a personal attack. A deliberate campaign of harassment from a woman who got a thrill from wielding petty authority. That night, he didn't just get angry. He got methodical. He felt the old tactical mindset click into place, the same one he used when assessing a chaotic trauma scene. Survey the environment, identify the threat, find the weakness, execute. He unearthed the HOA covenants from their welcome packet. The binder was 3 inches thick, filled with dense legalese that would bore most people into submission. But for Mark, it was enemy intel. He poured a cup of black coffee, the bitter aroma filling the quiet house, and began to read. He read every line, every subsection, every tedious amendment. Hours passed. The moon crawled across the sky. Then, at 2 a.m., under the dim glow of his kitchen light, he found it. It was a knowledge bomb buried deep in the fine print. Article 9, Section 3, Fine Assessment and Appeals Process. All violation notices alleging a finable offense must be preceded by a written notice to cure, allowing the homeowner a period of no less than 14 calendar days to rectify the alleged violation. Fines may only be levied after this period has expired without remedy. Brenda hadn't sent a notice to cure for the gnomes or the mailbox. She had jumped straight to the fine, a clear violation of her own procedures. She was either incompetent or, more likely, she was counting on no one ever reading this far. It was a small crack in her armor, but it was enough. The next day, Mark waited by the community mailboxes, the hub of neighborhood gossip. The metal boxes radiated the day's heat against his hand. He saw Brenda's golf cart approaching, a silent predator on the prowl. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He met her at her own game, polite, procedural, and armed with the rules. "Brenda, a quick question for you," he began, holding up the 2 fine notices. Her smile was brittle. "Mark, is there a problem?" Just a point of clarification, he said, his tone even. I was reviewing the covenants last night, specifically Article 9, Section 3. It seems to mention a mandatory 14-day notice to cure period before any fines can be issued. I don't seem to have received one for either of these. The change was immediate and deeply satisfying. Her plastic smile faltered. A flicker of something, shock, anger, maybe even fear, darted through her eyes. Her perfectly powdered face flushed a splotchy, uneven red that clashed horribly with her pink visor. For the first time, Brenda Millstone was caught off guard. She was so used to residents rolling over that she had no protocol for one who had actually done the reading. This was a thumbnail-worthy moment if there ever was one. The HOA tyrant. Speechless, holding a stack of mail she suddenly seemed to have forgotten how to process. That's a procedural guideline, she stammered, snatching the notices from him. A clerical error. I'll have the fines waived. Thank you, Mark said, but he wasn't smiling. I'd appreciate it if the proper procedure was followed from now on. For aesthetic harmony, of course. He walked away, the small victory tasting like sweet iced tea on a blistering day, but he knew this wasn't the end. He hadn't just corrected an error, he had challenged her authority in public. He had exposed her. In the rigid, unforgiving ecosystem of Whispering Pines, he had just painted a massive target on his own back. He had won the battle, but Brenda Millstone was about to bring the full, illegal weight of the HOA down on him to win the war. What would you have done in my place? Drop it in the comments. The retaliation was subtle at first, a campaign of psychological warfare. His morning newspaper would be mysteriously damp, as if the sprinkler had been aimed at it directly. Anonymous complaints were filed with the HOA about the excessive noise of Leo's laughter in their own backyard. Neighbors who had been friendly now offered clipped hellos and averted their gazes. He was being socially isolated, a tactic as old as time. It was a slow bleed, designed to make him and his family feel like unwelcome outsiders until they either broke the rules for real or just gave up and moved. But Mark wasn't a quitter. His medic training had taught him to function, under extreme pressure, to remain calm while everything around him was falling apart. This HOA scandal wasn't a car wreck, but it required the same cool-headed strategy. He started documenting everything. He took time-stamped photos of the wet newspapers. He saved the passive-aggressive notes. He was building a case, file by file, which brought him to that Tuesday afternoon. The call crackled over the radio in his ambulance. Male 82, reporting severe chest pain, difficulty breathing. 114 Azalea Lane. Mark's heart seized. 114 Azalea Lane. Mr. Henderson. He lived 2 doors down from Brenda Millstone. Dispatch. This is Medic 3, we're 5 minutes out, Mark radioed back, his voice tight. That's my neighborhood. I know the address. They arrived on the quiet, tree-lined street with lights flashing but no siren, a small professional courtesy, to avoid panicking the neighbors. Mark's eyes did a quick tactical survey of the scene. Mr. Henderson's driveway was blocked by a landscaping truck. The street was narrow. The fastest, most direct path for the gurney was a straight shot from the front door to the curb. And the clearest spot on that curb was the guest parking space belonging to Unit 112. Brenda's unit. Park it there, Dave. Right in that guest spot. It's the closest, clearest exit, he commanded, already grabbing his jump bag. Let's go. He never gave it a second thought. In his world, a painted line on the pavement was meaningless when measured against a human life. Property was temporary. A heartbeat was not. He and Dave rushed inside, the screen door slamming behind them, and found Mr. Henderson collapsed on his kitchen floor. And that's when Brenda Millstone, watching from her window, saw her opening. She saw the ambulance not as a lifeline, but as a violation, a flagrant breach of the rules parked squarely in her territory. She didn't see the life-or-death struggle happening just 50 feet away. She saw a chance to finally, decisively put the disobedient paramedic from down the street in his place. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling with a righteous fury, and dialed 911. Back inside, as Mark fought to restart his neighbor's heart, the sound of a police siren began to grow an insistent wail cutting through the quiet afternoon. It was getting closer. Too close. Mark glanced through the front window, his rhythm on Mr. Henderson's chest never faltering. He saw the patrol car pull up, its blue lights joining the red ones from his ambulance, a chaotic, swirling vortex of color. And he saw her. Brenda, standing on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, pointing directly at his ambulance with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. The deputy stepped out of his car, his hand resting on his service weapon, his face a mask of confusion and annoyance. He wasn't there as backup. He was there as her instrument of revenge. The officer's flashlight beam sliced through the window, catching Mark square in the eyes, a blinding interrogation light in the middle of a code blue. A man's life was hanging by a thread, and the HOA had just sent the police to shut down the rescue operation. The deputy's flashlight beam was a physical thing, a solid rod of light pinning Mark to the floor. Outside, the world was a chaotic symphony of red and blue strobes. Inside, the only rhythm was the desperate pump of his hands on Mr. Henderson's chest. 30 more seconds to the next shock, he grunted, not taking his eyes off his patient. Dave, comms, now. His partner moved with the fluid economy of a professional used to chaos. Dave opened the door just enough to block the deputy's view of the living room. Evening, officer. Paramedic Dave Royce. We've got a cardiac arrest in progress. What's the issue? His voice was a wall of calm authority. The deputy, a young man named Miller whose name tag gleamed in the flashing lights, looked flustered. The scent of ozone from the defibrillator charging inside mixed with the sweet smell of blooming night jasmine from a nearby trellis. We, got a 911 call for a vehicle theft? A stolen parking spot? He said the words as if tasting something foul. His eyes darted past Dave to Mark on the floor, then to the frail gray man beneath him. The pieces clicked into place with an audible sigh of frustration. Oh, for crying out loud! It's her again, isn't it? Her? Dave asked, playing. Dumb. The HOA lady. Millstone, Deputy Miller muttered, lowering his flashlight. She calls once a week. Kids chalk on the sidewalk, a garbage can lid not perfectly sealed. But this is a new one. He shook his head, the leather of his duty belt creaking. He looked at Dave with a newfound respect. Sorry to interrupt, you guys do what you gotta do. I'll go have a word. Mark heard the exchange as if from a great distance. He was in the zone, a place of pure protocol and adrenaline. A moment later, the defibrillator whined to full charge. Clear! He yelled. Mr. Henderson's body jolted on the linoleum. Mark's eyes shot to the monitor. A weak, thready but present rhythm appeared on the screen, a sinus rhythm. Faint, but it was there. We've got a pulse, Mark breathed, the tension draining from him in a dizzying rush. Let's package and run. As they wheeled the gurney out towards the ambulance, the scene on the street was a frozen drama. Deputy Miller was on Brenda's porch, his stance wide, his expression a mask of pure exasperation. Brenda was gesturing wildly at the ambulance, her face contorted in a mask of indignation. Her voice, sharp and piercing, cut through the night. Blatant disregard for private property. This is an illegal HOA violation, and I want him charged. Miller just shook his head and walked back to his cruiser, not even bothering to write a note. The public humiliation, the dismissal by law enforcement in front of the entire cul-de-sac, was a worse blow to Brenda than any fine. Mark locked eyes with her for a brief second as he closed the ambulance doors. The look on her face wasn't just anger anymore. It was hatred. Cold, deep, and personal. He had not only defied her, he had made her look like a fool. This illegal HOA takedown was about to become her life's singular focus. Ever dealt with an HOA bully? Let's see how many of us there are. The first shot in the new war arrived a week later. It was a certified letter, the kind that makes your stomach clench. The paper inside was thick, embossed with the Whispering Pines logo. The accusation was so absurd it took Mark a moment to process it. Citing Article 13, Section 2, Prohibition of Commercial Enterprises, the board was formally accusing him of operating an illegal business from his residence. Their evidence? The commercial vehicle, his ambulance, which had been parked on HOA property while he was conducting business, saving Mr. Henderson's life. The letter, drafted by the HOA's lawyer, threatened a $5,000 fine and a lien against his home if the enterprise did not cease immediately. It was a classic intimidation tactic, a legal threat so flimsy it was laughable, but terrifying to anyone unfamiliar with the law. The ink on the page smelled acrid, the scent of a scorched earth policy. This was Brenda's revenge, a way to bury him in legal fees and stress. But she had made a critical miscalculation. She assumed Mark was just a paramedic. She didn't know that his father was a union lawyer who had taught him one crucial lesson growing up. Never, ever let a bully back you down with paperwork. The next phase of her attack targeted the entire community. A neighborhood-wide email went out. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, written by Brenda but signed by the board of directors. It spoke of a recent troubling incident involving unauthorized commercial vehicles and the importance of protecting their shared property values. It didn't name Mark, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew. It was a poison dart designed to turn his neighbors against him. And it worked. The averted glances became outright glares. Whispers followed him when he walked to the mailbox. Sarah came home one afternoon to find the air let out of her car's front tire, a slow, hissing leak with no nail to be found. The siege had begun. The violations became a relentless drumbeat, a montage of petty harassment. Monday, a notice was taped to his door. The paper felt rough, cheap, and insulting for lawn height discrepancy. The fine was $25. Later that day, Mark saw Brenda near his property line, holding a ruler to a blade of grass. On Wednesday, another fine, this time for leaving their recycling bin at the curb until 7:15 p.m., a full 15 minutes past the mandated retrieval time. The air that evening was cool, but Mark's face was hot with rage. On Friday, an official complained about excessive illumination from their porch light, the same standard issue fixture on every single house on the block. Each violation was a paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they were designed to bleed him dry emotionally and financially. Mark knew he was being pushed into a corner. He also knew that a cornered man has two choices: surrender or fight his way out. He chose to fight. His counterattack began not with a lawyer, but with a walk. He started talking to his neighbors one by one. He didn't lead with his own problems. He asked about theirs. He found that beneath the serene, manicured surface of whispering pines, there was a deep well of resentment. His first ally was Mrs. Gable, a sweet, elderly widow in her late 70s who had lived there for 20 years. Her pride and joy were her peace roses, which had won awards at the county fair. Brenda had recently cited her for unkempt shrubbery, demanding the prize-winning bushes be pruned back to a uniform, characterless sphere. "She told me they lacked structural discipline," Mrs. Gable recounted, her voice trembling with indignation as she snipped angrily at a dead blossom. The sharp, sweet scent of the roses hung in the air, a fragrance of defiance. Then came the Rodriguez family. They were a young couple with 3 kids who had been fined $300 for noise pollution when their son's 10th birthday party, complete with a bouncy castle, had become too boisterous on a Saturday afternoon. "She called the cops on a bunch of 10-year-olds, Mr. Rodriguez said, his voice a low simmer of anger. Claimed it was a public nuisance. His most powerful ally, however, was Mr. Henderson's daughter, a sharp-witted accountant named Maria. When she learned that Brenda had called 911 to report the ambulance as a stolen vehicle while her father was dying, her grief morphed into a cold, calculated fury. "That woman didn't just delay his care, she interfered with first responders. That's a crime," Maria said, her eyes like chips of flint. "She has no idea who she's messing with. My father's entire life was about doing things by the book. We're going to use her own book to destroy her. If you think HOAs should be held accountable, type yes so we can get this trending." With Maria's financial acumen and Mark's methodical mindset, they formed a small resistance cell. They started digging, requesting public records, and pooling their knowledge. They uncovered the first piece of Brenda's hidden vulnerability. Her husband, a local real estate developer named Richard Millstone, was the original builder of Whispering Pines. His company was leveraged to the hilt, and a new round of financing for his next big project depended on the success and pristine reputation of this community. Whispering Pines wasn't just Brenda's kingdom, it was the cornerstone of their family's financial survival. Her obsession with perfection wasn't just a personality quirk, it was desperation. She wasn't just protecting the rules, she was protecting a collapsing empire. Armed with this knowledge, Mark exercised his right as a homeowner. He formally requested 5 years of the HOA's financial statements, meeting minutes, and vendor contracts. The request was met with resistance, but Maria had already highlighted the state law that required them to comply within 10 business days. The documents arrived in a heavy cardboard box that smelled of dust and deceit. For 3 nights, with the windows open to the sound of crickets and the taste of stale coffee on his tongue, Mark went through every line item. It was tedious work, but his medic training had prepared him. Finding a subtle arrhythmia on an EKG strip was no different from finding an anomaly in a budget report. It was about recognizing a pattern that shouldn't be there. He found it on the 3rd night, the landscaping contract. It was the HOA's single biggest expense, over $100,000 a year, awarded to a company called Pristine Lawns LLC. The payments were consistent, but the figures seemed inflated by at least 40% compared to market rates. On a hunch, Mark looked up Pristine Lawns on the North Carolina Secretary of State website. The business was registered to a P.O. box. The name of the registered agent was Brenda's maiden name, Peterson. It was the ultimate knowledge bomb. Brenda was paying her own company with HOA funds at an inflated rate. This wasn't just a conflict of interest. This was a criminal enterprise. It was fraud. Embezzlement. He immediately cross-referenced the North Carolina Planned Community Act, finding the exact statute he needed. Parv. 47F 3103, Duty of Care. It explicitly stated that board members have a fiduciary duty to the association and must disclose any and all conflicts of interest. There was no record of her ever disclosing this in any of the meeting minutes. He had her. Cold. What they did next almost made me lose everything, but it also gave me the win of my life. But before Mark could deploy his weapon, Brenda launched a preemptive strike. It was a move of shocking audacity. Her husband, whose company still held the majority voting power through several undeveloped lots, called an emergency HOA meeting. Mark and his small band of allies attended, walking into a community clubhouse that felt as cold and sterile as an operating room. Richard Millstone, a man with a glad-handing smile and shark-like eyes, stood at the podium. He spoke of unforeseen expenses and a critically low reserve fund. Then he dropped the hammer. The board was levying a one-time special assessment of $5,000 per household to ensure the long-term financial stability of our community. The room erupted. Shouts of anger and disbelief echoed off the vaulted ceilings. $5,000 was a crippling blow for many of the families. Brenda stood beside her husband, her expression one of faux solemnity, but Mark could see the odd glint of triumph in her eyes. It was a brilliant, evil move. She was using her husband's power to punish the entire neighborhood, and in doing so, making Mark the villain. The timing was no accident. The whispers would start immediately. This never would have happened if that paramedic hadn't started making trouble. She was replenishing the very fund she had been secretly draining and using it to turn everyone against him. His allies looked at him, their faces pale with shock and betrayal. The unity he had worked so hard to build was shattering before his eyes. He held the proof of her crimes in his briefcase, but if he revealed it now, in this chaos, it would look like a desperate, self-serving lie. The next afternoon, Mark sat. Across from a lawyer, a man named Ben Carter, whose office smelled of old books, lemon polish, and a fight. Mark had laid everything out. The harassment, the fraudulent 911 call, the financial records, the illegal self-dealing, and the punitive special assessment. Ben leaned back in his worn leather chair, which groaned in protest. You've got them. Mark. On multiple fronts. The self-dealing is a slam dunk for a civil suit, maybe even criminal charges. The special assessment is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. But you need to understand what happens next. He leaned forward, his eyes serious. The moment we file, they will come after you with everything they have. They'll countersue. They'll subpoena your work records. They'll depose your wife. They will try to bury you, to make you an example so no one else ever dares to question them again. He slid a thick document across the polished surface of the desk. A retainer agreement. Signing this means war, Mark. A real war. They'll try to ruin you and your family. Mark stared at the paper. The afternoon sun streamed through the window blinds, striping the page. His life savings would be gone in a matter of months. His family's peace, already so fragile, would be obliterated. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. The silver clip caught the light, flashing in his eyes, a searing pinpoint of brightness that instantly transported him back to the strobing lights of his ambulance, to the cold linoleum floor under his knees, to a man's life hanging in the balance. This was never just about a parking spot or a mailbox. It was about a bully who believed the rules didn't apply to her, even when a life was on the line. The lawyer's pen hovered over the signature line, a silver dagger poised to strike. Was he willing to risk everything he had, to sacrifice his family's security, for a principle? The scratching sound of the pen nib against the thick cotton fiber paper was louder than a gunshot in the quiet office. It was a definitive, irrevocable sound. The ink, a deep and resolute black, flowed into the shape of his name. Mark Callahan pushed the signed retainer agreement back across the polished mahogany desk. The faint, pleasant smell of lemon oil and old leather filled his nostrils, a scent of tradition and battle. He had just committed his family's savings, their peace, and their future to a war against a petty tyrant. It was terrifying, and for the first time in months, he felt the icy grip of anxiety loosen its hold on his chest, replaced by the hot, clarifying fire of purpose. Ben Carter, his lawyer, nodded slowly, his expression grim but respectful. "The war begins," he said, and it was a war. The HOA's law firm, a Charlotte powerhouse named Mills, Thorne and Associates, descended with the subtlety of an artillery barrage. The first salvo was a frivolous countersuit, a 150-page document filled with wild accusations. Mark was accused of defamation for speaking to his neighbors, of property damage for the ambulance's tire tracks, and even of harassment for formally requesting the HOA's financial records. It was a strategy of overwhelming force, designed to bankrupt and demoralize him before he ever saw the inside of a courtroom. Then came the depositions. Mark spent 8 hours in a soulless beige conference room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The HOA's lead attorney, a man with a merciless smile and eyes like a reptile's, questioned him about every aspect of his life. His military service, his performance reviews at the paramedic station, even a speeding ticket he'd gotten a decade ago. It was a brutal, invasive process, a character assassination disguised as legal discovery. Sarah was next. They questioned her for hours, asking insinuating questions about their finances, their marriage, their parenting. She left the room pale and shaken, the assault leaving wounds no one could see. Back in Whispering Pines, the neighborhood became a toxic landscape. The special assessment had poisoned the well. Families were forced to dip into college funds and retirement savings. Some blamed Brenda, but many, exhausted and scared, directed their anger at the man who had started it all. "Go away" was spray painted on his driveway one night, the acrid smell of the paint hanging in the humid morning air. The taste of his morning coffee turned to ash in his mouth. He was fighting for the very people who now despised him, but Mark had been trained for endurance. This was a mass casualty incident, a slow-motion disaster, and his job was to triage the damage and stick to the mission. He and Ben didn't just defend, they went on the offensive. They filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Attorney General's office, presenting the ironclad evidence of Brenda's self-dealing, the fraudulent invoices, and the shell company registered in her maiden name. They highlighted the punitive, retaliatory nature of the special assessment. This single act changed the entire battlefield. The fight was no longer a private civil matter. It was now a potential state-level criminal investigation. The AG's office, smelling a politically juicy case of consumer fraud, launched an official inquiry. And that inquiry forced what Brenda had been avoiding: a community-wide, externally mediated, open meeting. The next 60 seconds will show you exactly how a single document can destroy an entire HOA. The meeting was held in the gymnasium of a local middle school, the only place large enough to hold all the angry homeowners. The air was thick with the scent of institutional floor wax, damp raincoats, and palpable animosity. Hundreds of residents sat on uncomfortable folding chairs, their faces a mixture of anger, fear, and exhaustion. Mark sat with Sarah, Maria Henderson, Mrs. Gable, and the Rodriguez family. They were a small island of solidarity in a sea of tension. Brenda Millstone and her husband Richard took the stage as if they were royalty. Brenda wore a power suit the color of blood, her silver hair a perfect, immovable helmet. She gripped the lectern, her knuckles white, and began with a speech oozing with condescending grace. She spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings and the actions of a single disgruntled homeowner who threatened their peaceful way of life. She was arrogant, dismissive, and completely confident in her power to control the narrative. She didn't see residents, she saw subjects. Then Ben Carter was invited to the stage. He was the opposite of Brenda, calm, unassuming, and armed with nothing but a projector and a stack of documents. He didn't raise his voice. He simply presented the facts. The first image projected onto the giant screen behind him was an invoice from Pristine Lawns LLC for $12,000 for spring mulching services. The second was a quote from the 3 other largest landscaping companies in the county for the same service. The highest was $7,000. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Next, he projected the Secretary of State filing for Pristine Lawns. The name of the registered agent, Brenda Peterson, was circled in red. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. He let the image hang there for a moment, the silence more damning than any accusation. Brenda, seeing her perfect world crumbling, did exactly what a cornered narcissist always does. She detonated. She lunged for the microphone, shoving her own lawyer aside. Her face was a mask of crimson fury, her voice a shrill, cracking shriek that echoed through the gym. "He's twisting everything," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. "This community was nothing before I got here, a swamp. I made it beautiful. I made it valuable. I have given every waking moment of my life for the last 10 years to protecting your property values. I sourced the best landscaper. I managed every detail. Does no one understand the work involved, the sacrifice?" Her husband tried to touch her arm, to pull her back, but she shook him off. "A little compensation for my efforts is the least." "I deserve," she bellowed, the words hanging in the stunned silence. "The least! You should be thanking me." It was a full public confession, born of pure, undiluted arrogance. The homeowners stared, mouths agape, as the woman they had entrusted with their money and their homes admitted to embezzling from them, framing it as her royal prerogative. In that moment, all the whispers, all the division Mark had faced, evaporated. The enemy was no longer him. The enemy was on the stage, ranting. As the crowd began to shout, Ben Carter stepped calmly back to the microphone. He waited for the noise to subside, a quiet island in a storm of outrage. "Mrs. Millstone has just made a compelling case for the state's fraud investigators," he said, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter. "But her confession is no longer the most important issue we face tonight." He paused, letting the tension build. "The question is, what can we, the homeowners, do about it? The board will tell you the process for removal is long and difficult. They are wrong. This was it, the final decisive knowledge bomb. Under the North Carolina Planned Community Act, Section 47F3-118, there is a special provision. It states that if board members are found to have engaged in willful or wanton misconduct, like, for example, embezzling funds and then admitting to it in a public forum, the normal rules no longer apply. A petition signed by just 20% of the association's voting members is enough to force an immediate vote for the removal of the entire board. He held up a clipboard with a thick stack of papers attached. The good news is, we didn't. Stop at 20%. He looked directly at Brenda, whose face had gone from red fury to a ghastly waxy white. As of 30 minutes ago, we have legally verified signatures from over 60% of the homeowners of Whispering Pines, demanding your immediate removal. Checkmate. The sound in the room was a roar, a tidal wave of cathartic anger and relief. Brenda Millstone looked out at the faces of her neighbors, no longer her subjects but her judges, and for the first time, she looked small, defeated. Her empire of petty tyranny, built on fine print and fear, had been dismantled by one man, who simply decided to read the rules. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The vote to remove the board was nearly unanimous. An interim board, led by a triumphant Mrs. Gable and a determined Mr. Rodriguez, was elected on the spot. Their first act was to unanimously vote to reverse the special assessment and fire the HOA's law firm. The state's investigation moved forward. And 3 months later, Brenda Millstone was indicted on felony charges of embezzlement. Her husband's company, disgraced and unable to secure new financing, declared bankruptcy. Whispering Pines began to breathe again. The oppressive weight of constant surveillance lifted. The ridiculous rules were rewritten. The basketball hoop went up in Mark's driveway and stayed there. The Rodriguez family threw another birthday party for their son, and this time, the whole neighborhood came. The air filled with the delicious smell of barbecue smoke and the sound of children's laughter. Mrs. Gable's roses, no longer bound by structural discipline, bloomed in a riot of joyful, chaotic color. Sarah's garden gnomes, rescued from the garage, stood proudly once more amongst the flowers. One perfect sunny afternoon a few months later, Mark was outside, teaching Leo how to shoot a free throw. He heard the familiar, quiet rumble of an ambulance turning onto their street. It was his old partner, Dave, behind the wheel. They were there for a non-emergency follow-up with Mr. Henderson, who was now back home, grumpier and more full of bad jokes than ever. Mark watched as Dave, without a moment's hesitation, pulled the ambulance into the very same spot it had occupied that fateful day. The guest parking space in front of what used to be Brenda Millstone's pristine, empty townhome, now owned by a young family with a tricycle on the porch. The vehicle sat there, mundane and magnificent, a symbol of sanity restored. No one pointed. No one called the police. It was just an ambulance, parked where it needed to be to help a neighbor. Dave caught Mark's eye from the driver's seat. He gave a small, slow nod. Mark nodded back, a lump forming in his throat. The memory of that terrible day, the flashing lights, the fear, the fury, it was all still there. But the sting was gone. It had been replaced with the quiet, profound satisfaction of a battle won. This was the full-circle callback he had fought for, a moment of peace that felt more triumphant than any courtroom victory. It was never about the parking spot. It was about the simple, unshakable principle that no one is above the law, and no rule is more important than a human life. It was about one person, then a few, drawing a line in the sand and defending it, proving that a community is not about the perfection of its lawns, but the character of its people. They had faced down an illegal HOA scandal, and in the ashes of that fight, they had built a true neighborhood. Your story could be next. Comment your HOA horror below, and I might cover it. If you believe no one is above the law, hit that subscribe button so we can take down every corrupt HOA one story at a time. Like this video, share it with a friend who needs to see that justice is possible, and remember, the more people who know their rights, the harder it is for bullies to win. Want to see another insane HOA takedown? Click the video on your screen. Right now, you won't believe what happened when an HOA tried to fine a soldier for flying the American flag.